Coming up on Why Should I Trust You? Do you believe in ghosts, the paranormal? You're not alone. And hold that thought, because it relates to this episode, we promise. We know that when it comes to trust, it's pretty grim out there. Trust in institutions is collapsing. You can see it just about every which way you look, from media to government to higher ed, you name it. But is some suspicion healthy, necessary even? Has our belief in institutions led us to a dangerous place? On the flip side, if we tear down these institutions to rid them of the rot, and we thumb our nose at expertise, where does that leave us? Today, reporter and Pulitzer Prize finalist Matthew Hongoltz-Hetling joins us to weigh in on these questions and to talk to us about his new book, looking at the rise in our belief in the paranormal, which he says might be the key to understanding where all this mistrust could lead us. Let's get started. Hello!
Welcome.
Guys, I think the show today is going to melt some brains. It's about ghosts. It's about the afterlife. We may even get a Bigfoot mention in there. Do you guys believe in ghosts? Anyone, any takers here?
Mark doesn't.
Negative.
You know, here's the thing about ghosts and me.
Well, wait. What about the rest of you? Don't even just leave me out there.
Yeah.
I do not.
Okay. Oh.
Yeah, Maggie.
I think I might be the outsider on this one. I'm not going to say 100% ghosts are real, but I think there's a lot in the world that we still haven't explained, and that's what draws me to science, is there are things that we don't understand.
Ooh.
Okay, breaking news, the virologist believes in ghosts.
Hey.
Look, all of this gets at this nagging issue that basically we don't trust anything anymore, and some of that may explain some of the things we do believe.
Yeah, so while a lot of this mistrust is new, I kind of have to say I was raised with a lot of distrust in my community. I grew up in Nebraska in a working class community and really lived this era before it became like full blown and nationwide. And now this mistrust is not only raging around me, but it's painfully kind of focused on me and people like me.
And that's super interesting, Maggie, because like if you think about it, so you're saying you grew up in a community that mistrusted elites, like even before it became more widespread. But like now you work for an elite institution, right? Johns Hopkins. Yeah. So you have an elite sounding credential, a PhD. You publish stuff for medical journals. I think a lot of people now think medical journals are kind of bought and sold. And you're doing this with us, and we're a bunch of former network news people. So
We're the worst.
You are target.
Yeah. Well, and I get it. I mean, I do check a lot of these different boxes, and I've been on both sides of the trust thing. And my philosophy going into everything is to be rigorous, to follow the scientific method, and be transparent. And ultimately, I hope I'm going to not just earn trust, but not take it for granted, which I think is a key point that a lot of us in science and public health have to take on right now.
Yeah, amen to that. And look, there are a lot of people listening today who fall into that mistrustful camp. And I think your simple mantra that trust is something that's earned and not taken for granted because you have some letter by your name or work for some fancy sounding institution. I mean, that is key. Well, look, we are thrilled to welcome to the show Matthew Hongoltz-Hetling. He is an investigative journalist who was a finalist for a Pulitzer Prize. He's won the incredibly prestigious Polk Award. He lives in Vermont, and we love Matt for a lot of reasons. But also because, you know, as we've been working on this podcast, you know, it's all about the breakdown in trust. We've noticed that Matt has kind of been on a parallel path, and he's reporting and writing and thinking about the same topic and also talking to people who've lost faith and trust in institutions. To that end, he is the author of If It Sounds Like a Quack, and his brand new book, which we cannot recommend to you enough, guys, which will be out, I believe, on May 20th. It's called The Ghost Lab: How Bigfoot Hunters, Mediums, and Alien Enthusiasts Are Wrecking Science. You see, we've already mentioned Bigfoot. Matthew, welcome to Why Should I Trust You?
Brenda, thank you so much for having me. It's so great to be here with the gang. I love the podcast and so excited to be talking to you today.
Great.
Awesome.
Welcome.
Look, Matt, before we dive in, Tom, this is something that we do. We like to set the table a little bit. If you believe in the numbers, what are they showing us about what we trust in and what we don't, Tom?
Yeah, I mean, one place to start is higher ed. You know, we used to trust that was the gateway, the pathway to success, that it was absolutely necessary, you know, and maybe high cost of tuition are weighing down on that trust. But either way, you know, according to a report by Best Colleges, more than 40 colleges have closed since 2020. So colleges, you know, we focus so much on the elite institutions, but a lot of the more accessible schools for the vast majority of Americans are struggling financially. People are starting to veer away from them. In that like CNBC piece that was all about this report, they made the point that those soaring costs have left a lot of people thinking this whole system of higher ed is just rigged. It's there to boost the wealthy. And that has led to about 1 in 4 Americans now think it's, quote, really important to get a college degree. So that's a pretty big collapse.
Right.
There are also a few other things that we typically think about are trusted places. I mean, think about your like local hospital, especially if you're in a rural area. This is where you would go to see doctors, for big and complicated things and also little things. But some of those places aren't there anymore. I mean, since 2005, nearly 200 rural hospitals have either closed or they stopped providing inpatient services. And if you just look at the last 5 years since the pandemic, 40 of those hospitals have closed. And this is tracked by a couple of universities, including the University of North Carolina. Now, look, what about organized religion? The National Council of Churches estimates that 1/4 of all churches in operation today will close in the next several years. And, look, the media, we've talked about the media a lot. According to Gallup, a third, 36% of Americans have no trust whatsoever in the media. And that's now overtaken the 31% who have a great deal or fair amount of trust. Now, remember, in the 1970s, it was different. The number of people who had a great deal or fair amount of trust in the media, that was high. It was around 70%. And then, right there at the bottom, not totally at the bottom, but pretty close, is Congress. 34% have a great deal or fair amount of trust in Congress. So only 1 in 3. And that's before this newly elected group we have now in Congress.
Man, you're a barrel of laughs, Mark.
Somebody's got to do it.
Okay, look, Matt, we have laid out a fairly grim trust picture of this country. A new America where folks aren't necessarily going to college. They are pissed at their TV when the news comes on. They're voting in fewer elections because the whole thing is rigged. They're skipping church on Sundays. I want to just read to you a line from your excellent book, The Ghost Lab, in which you say, because, this all, I think, dovetails nicely into why you talked about ghosts and the paranormal. This is what you said. You said, to understand the ghost hunters and their paranormal compatriots is to understand America's near-term future. Matt, what did you mean when you said that?
Yeah, well, that's an excellent question. So basically, when I started looking at these issues of trust, I was drawn to New Hampshire, which is sort of in my backyard, and which has been a leading indicator of a lot of these trends that you're talking about. Before America as a whole sort of started to turn on government and on colleges and on churches, New Hampshire was like way ahead of the curve. So they are our tiny little, trust barren canary in a coal mine. And I started looking at these people in New Hampshire and talking with them, and I'm fairly well embedded in a lot of circles and communities there. And so I started to wonder, like, okay, well, people are trusting something. They're making a decision for some reason other than just sort of like their own internal moral compass or whatever their gut judgment is. Surely they're turning somewhere for their trust. And what I found was that a lot of people were taking those decisions that they used to bring to an expert. You would go to a priest perhaps to talk about the afterlife. You would go to a therapist to talk about feelings of anxiety. You would go to a psychologist to talk about the voices in your head. Instead, all of these people were turning to the world of paranormal enthusiasts. If you hear a voice in your head, one explanation is what the psychologist will tell you, but another explanation is what a medium, a psychic medium, or a ghost hunter might tell you about why you're feeling uneasy, about why you're hearing voices in your head, about what has truly happened to your loved one who has moved on. And so once I sort of made that connection, I started, delving deeper into it, and I have a lot of thoughts.
Yeah. Well, so let's just kind of make sure we're operating on the same glossary here. So tell us what paranormal means, what a ghost hunter is.
Sure. Yeah, no, and that's great. Those are two separate terms. So paranormal is essentially a phenomena that is not explained by science, or that has not been proven by science to exist. So, maybe it's out there. There's a time when we could have probably characterized lowland gorillas as a paranormal creature because nobody had ever had proof of them. But then once somebody hauled a stuffed gorilla into the Royal Academy of Sciences in the late 1800s, early 1900s, suddenly that became a scientifically documented thing. So anything that is out there, Bigfoot, aliens, ghosts, those are all sort of categorized under this paranormal umbrella. And while they are very, very different phenomena, the folks who appreciate them tend to flock together because they have sort of a shared culture and value set. And I was really interested in what that value set was because we've all sort of become aware of what we're calling conspiracy theories and sort of like their poisonous effect on certain areas of our civic life and our society. And I think our gut response is to just debunk those things and say that they are ridiculous. But I wanted to find out a little bit more about why folks, what is the worldview that leads one to think that the government is, let's say, secretly run by lizard people.
Hmm.
And there are some legit answers.
Wait, so when you said paranormal is anything that can't be explained by science, my mind was blown there. It is religion a kind of paranormal? Like our everyday
I,
religion?
I would argue, yes. Anything that's mystic, anything that's spiritual is sort of it is supernatural in origin and is therefore paranormal. Um, but there's a big difference between organized religion and the sorts of paranormal folks that I'm talking about. What religions have that the sort of more fringe spiritual beliefs don't is an agreed upon set of dogma, right? The church has its dictates, and scientists may not agree with religious folks, Christians, about what happened and what in the Bible is factually accurate, but the folks within that religious community all have sort of like a set of protocols and beliefs that binds them together. Paranormal world, much more fractured, much less agreement on whether that parasitic entity that's in your home is simply feeding on your emotions when you're feeling down or causing you to feel down or all sorts of other tantalizing possibilities.
Yeah, in your book, Matt, you trace this crew of folks that are trying to stand up sort of an organization that is going to be sort of a convening group for people who are feeling this, and more Americans are moving towards this. This isn't some really fringe thing anymore. The group that you track as they grow, they really want to bring like scientific method to this. Even they don't want it to just be go by belief. They want to prove that this is happening, which is kind of really a full circle thought because they're breaking away from science, moving towards the paranormal, but then grabbing science and trying to use it to prove the paranormal. I mean, just talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, science still has some cultural cachet, right? And when we want to sound serious and when we want to be taken seriously, we often adopt the language and the sort of thought systems that come along with the scientific method, because there is a sort of like firmness and reality to them. The ghost hunters that we watch on TV don't call themselves ghost hunters. They call themselves paranormal investigators because that is a more scientific term. And they don't walk around typically with dowsing rods and Bibles. They walk around with recorders and equipment and EMF detectors and all those sorts of things because these are sort of like the trappings of science. And you can do that in a very bad, very sloppy way that doesn't bear up any sort of scientific standard whatsoever, almost like you're just playing dress up. Or, as this group did, you can try to adopt the scientific method in a very serious and real way. And so they took up this sort of noble quest. Hey, we think the institutions and the scientific establishment has missed something that's important about our world. We have personal experiences that we take as convincing to us, but we believe that there must be traces of these experiences that we've had that can be sort of held in the hand and appreciated and made real and agreed upon. And so they took up this quest to bring science to the paranormal, even though the paranormal realm, as you say, Tom, does exist largely outside of science right now.
Matt, that just kind of blew my mind because, what you're saying, the idea that that these folks think that science is missing something and that this mission that they're on is going to kind of catch the things that science is missing through what they think is science itself. It actually reminds me of the last book you wrote. And I want to get a little bit into that. Quack was the book you wrote, because here's the thing. I can imagine some of our folks who are listening who may be a little bit skeptical of institutions right now, that paranormal is one thing, but for me to believe in alternative medicine, it doesn't mean that I'm like completely out there. I just think that like turmeric can work just as well as like medicine can. Help us kind of bridge that what did you see in your work in tracing folks who were really interested in alternative cures, alternative remedies, is they are often dismissed by many folks in institutional science. What did you see in your work with that?
That is such a good sort of framing. And I saw the same dynamic both in the world of the paranormal enthusiasts and in the world of the alternative health community. So basically, you start with something like a personal experience. It starts very easily. You say, "Hey, when I take turmeric, I feel better. When I take this vitamin, it makes me." Oh, I was getting a really bad cold, and I took my zinc pill, and then the next day I was feeling way better. So you've had this sort of personal experience, and then perhaps you seek to validate that personal experience, and you Google it, and you find that some people are telling you sort of like that your experience is valid, and those are possibly the sellers of zinc pills, and you have other folks who are telling you that your experience is invalid, and that would be perhaps the institutional backed, science backed experts. And so you start to wonder, well, if the institutions are telling me that I'm wrong, and now here I'm kind of pretty certain that I'm right because this other person validated my experience. It's my experience. I had this. I got better. I took the pill. I got better. So you start to think, why are these institutions missing out on documenting this valid experience that I had? And if your experience has been another very common experience, which is to feel the presence of a loved one shortly after their passing, you think, well, why hasn't science put a finger on this? Why are they telling me that this is a figment of my imagination? That leads to sort of like passing about for reasons that institutions are missing very important key pieces of evidence in what seem to be reality. And so you sort of very naturally conclude that either the institutions are deeply flawed and have enormous blind spots that don't allow them to identify simple remedies to what ails you in the alternative health world, or that they, for some reason, are not able to sense, spirits, or why haven't they caught up with Bigfoot yet? Why haven't they seen these aliens yet? When I see them in my backyard 3 times a year. The other possible explanation is not that the institutions are flawed, but that they are sort of intentionally hiding the truth for reasons perhaps of profit. And they're in the pocket of big pharma is a common thing we hear in the alternative world. And I'm not going to say that there's no truth to that, but to suggest that every medical expert is giving you bad advice because there's some influence on some level from big pharma is, of course, taking a grain to the sand and building an enormous beach of falsehood with it.
Yeah, I mean, the anecdotes are so powerful. As you know, Matt, I mean, I see patients every single day, and it's almost like the entryway into the visit. It's everything is about an anecdote. The person in front of you who is coming for evidence-based medicine, they are just an anecdote. They're just one person who has their story, and then the doctor has to, formulate some sort of treatment plan that is based, usually, if there is evidence, on evidence-based medicine. But these anecdotes that you talk about, oh, look, I took, this herbal medicine and it made me better. A lot of times you do need, that anecdote, and then, Brenda had the same anecdote, and then Maggie did, and Tom did. And wait a minute, maybe we could design a trial around all of those anecdotes and find some evidence in that. So that is for sure a way that we get to evidence-based science. I think the problem is when people just want to hang every single thing on their anecdote, and then we end up in a problem.
Yeah. And Maggie, you were saying something to us about infectious disease and the paranormal.
Yeah, so it's interesting because infectious diseases were considered paranormal or supernatural before we had germ theory in the 19th century. We had plagues that were often written off as God's wrath, or, the Black Death. People believed it was caused by miasma or bad air, and we know it's bacteria now. But there's tons of cases of this where before we knew about pathogens, it was all chalked up to these different cases. And it really wasn't until Louis Pasteur and Robert Koch came along that we understood that infectious diseases were causing some of these things that previously were linked as possession or some of these more paranormal feats. So it's just an interesting connection too, that some of the things that are occurring today that people are drawn to, there might be a scientifically valid reason to explore them that we don't know yet.
Yeah. Hey, Matt, I want to kind of pivot a little bit to sort of why all this is happening. Like, what's the landscape here? And, as you know, Ross Douthat of the New York Times has been, tracking sort of the breakdown or the decline of organized religion in America and the rise of this sort of new age of spirituality. And there was a column that it sort of stuck with me, and I went back and dug it up. And it was from 2014. And he writes, in the future, it seems there will be only one ism, individualism, and its rule will never end. As for religion, it shall decline. As for marriage, it shall be postponed. As for ideologies, they shall be rejected. As for patriotism, it shall be abandoned. As for strangers, they shall be distrusted. So he's obviously being a little playful there, but he's looking at the polling back in 2014 and sort of envisioning this rise of sort of the individual as the driver, this kind of libertarianism. I just wanted to kind of ask you a little bit about the medical freedom movement, and about whether public health, which is so about like everybody does this thing, the whole population does this thing, can that survive like this era that we're now in? Can the public health approach of everybody's got to row in the same direction, can that survive this moment where it's a lot of people turning inward and saying it's about me and my decisions and my doctor and what's best for me?
Yeah, Tom, where I think we've gone is that is no longer a default that we can sort of expect. That is a battle that will have to be fought every time we need everyone to row in the same direction. And we're going to have a degree of success. We're not going to have sort of like this whole country getting behind this initiative, even when it's something very important, like staving off death for a million citizens. We are not able to rest on a certainty that is going to work to our advantage. And what you say about individualism, that is, sort of right at the very heart of what we're talking about, and what my experience has been out there talking is that the experience of the individual is prioritized over sort of this notion that we have a shared collective reality, as can be documented by scientific facts or by religious dogma, right? That when those two things are in conflict, the individual must take precedent. And some spaces are very sort of like inclusive, where you can have two people in one room saying things that can't be simultaneously true. And the culture is such that you support and respect and hold both of those truths, even if they cannot possibly both be in evidence at the same time. That is a very different way to look at the universe. It's at the very sort of heart, I think, of the alternative medicine. In the paranormal group, people say, just hold whatever speaks to you. And these are this is a different way of understanding the world, and it is not a way that is compatible with institutional thinking as we have it today. And part of the reason that this dramatic change is happening is because institutions have opened a door by being so deeply flawed, right? We have people who are having experiences related to the common cold because institutions haven't been able to cure the common cold, right? Every time an institution falls down, that's an opportunity for a promise to take flight, whether or not that promise is based in reality.
Yeah. And so, on the idea of anytime an institution kind of falls, I mean, you've often talked about like there can be space for, somebody in an institution even thinking about an unproven cure and working with a patient on that. And I actually, there was an article, again, to quote an article in the New York Times by somebody who is a doctor. I believe her name is Dr. Daniela Yamas or Lamas. And this article was shared to me by so many people, you guys, and then I think I shared it to you. And it was this idea that, doctors do get confronted with patients asking for unproven cures. And there are times when they should like go for it. And here's what she writes. She says, doctors have to acknowledge the power differential between us and our patients who are away from their homes, in many ways helpless as they face the most difficult moments of their lives. We ask our patients to trust us implicitly, to believe our diagnoses, and to undergo courses of treatment they might not understand. This doesn't mean that we need to give patients whatever they want just to level the playing field, but we can take their requests seriously, even if we wouldn't have considered them otherwise. So are there examples that you can think of, Matt, where, meeting them halfway or just it not being this like simple yes, no dynamic of how to deal with treatments or preventatives could actually build trust and have a long-term benefit?
Yeah, I think that because our sort of knee-jerk reaction of sort of like academically trained people or people who have the science on their side, it's so easy for us to get on a high horse and say, I'm not going to respect you because what you're saying is wrong. What you're saying does not make sense, and therefore I can't let that slide. I'm going to just say that you're wrong, and anything that you say that's sort of like stemming from that worldview is also wrong. Doctors need, not doctors, medical professionals, institutionalists, academics. I think we all need to change that sort of we have to change that culture because it creates this really unhelpful gap between provider and patient. And one example of that is in Nevada. There's a state board of homeopathy. Are you familiar with this?
No.
All right, so homeopathy is one of the most popular alternative cures in the United States. It's based on sort of two principles. One is that if an herb or some ingredient creates a symptom in you, it will cure a disease that has that same symptom. So, in other words, if you are coming down with a disease that includes a fever, take an herb that will give you a fever, and that will make that disease go away. The second sort of false precept at the heart of homeopathy is that the smaller the dilution of that active ingredient, the more powerful the solution becomes. So there's this sort of
Wow.
process of dilution to where sometimes you get a supposed homeopathic cure that has not a single molecule of the supposed active ingredient. They explain this through vibrations and energy and things like this. And so science does not love homeopathy, and yet yet the state of Nevada has embraced homeopathy to the point that they will establish a state board of homeopaths. And so these are practitioners in that tradition who, they meet, they evaluate people for licensure and that sort of thing. What that does is that ensures that a homeopathic practitioner in Nevada has a stake in the system. They have a license, and they need that license to practice. In order to keep that, the license respects their ability to administer their homeopathy, but it makes sure that they're not going to, say, have a sexual relationship with a patient over whom they have power. It ensures that if they meet somebody with cancer, that they will refer that person to a medical doctor or to a professional, and it establishes sort of some baseline ethical standards that allow the homeopathic practitioner to do what they do, to make money while doing it, and yet does not make an enemy out of them and anyone who will listen to them. And so
Wow.
I think
There,
that is powerful.
That's amazing.
Brenda, the article
Mark, is this like
yeah, there's so much.
Your head explode?
A couple of things. The article that you sent around, yeah. I also got it. People who don't even talk to me on a regular basis. This article went around in medical circles because it was basically a doctor talking about end of life care. And I think if we don't put that asterisk on, this was somebody who was like in the end of their life, and then there is a little bit more room for some movement for a doctor to deviate, and maybe give something that they know isn't going to be helpful, but is it going to, make the family feel better? It's a really tough ethical question. I mean, we in medical school, we take medical ethics classes and we, scenario play all these things out. And it really is tough. And I'm listening to you guys talking about, Matt, I think you mentioned something along the lines like, people go to their doctor, they want to make sure people are going to get what they want, and you just give it to them if it's not really going to hurt them, and I'm now sitting here with my prescription pad and my pen, and my anxiety is like going up on this. I mean, really high. Look, at the end of the day, you guys can talk about it, how great it is, and you just give me this and just give me that. But I'm the one who has to like write the prescription, give it to you, take it to your pharmacy. And how can I write that prescription if I know it's not going to help you with the evidence that I've reviewed?
Well, so Mark, let me ask you. Yeah, now I have so much. I have to ask Mark this because exactly, you are a dermatologist. And boy, if there is one field that, and I'm a woman in her mid-40s, okay? Let me tell you, if there is one field that women like me feel like they are interested in, the alternative, the herbal, I am not ashamed to admit I got a jar of K-Beauty snail mucin, okay? Snail mucin.
I was like, I don't even know.
Do you know what snail mucin is?
I thought
I know what snails are. It's like
the excretion. Oh my God, I'm gonna get hate mail from this, but it's like excretion that comes out of a snail that like if you put on your skin. And I'm just saying, like, I look all right?
It's
like my skin is all right. Yeah. I'm just saying that, like, there's end of life care. I totally get it. But wait, what if it's like snail mucin?
Okay, fine. Okay, what if it is snail mucin that makes you have an allergic reaction, and now we need to give you a medicine to treat your allergic reaction that hurts your liver, right? For something that wasn't going to do any work. But
Mark's saying slippery slope.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a slippery slope. And look, we do want to give you things that are going to help. And the snail mucin is different. Let's go back to, I'm going to give you a medicine that you're going to then take to your pharmacy, and like you have it now a side effect or a drug interaction, or it does nothing for you for the condition. And let's talk about if they're serious conditions. But like if it's a serious condition and it's now, I'm going to give you this alternative just to make you happy, and that might make you happy. You could have a side effect, but you could also miss an opportunity to get an actual medicine that's going to work for you. I mean, we've heard of celebrities who've foregone, traditional treatments for cancer, and, who try to deviate from like the standard of medical care that results in their death. I have a moment with you as a patient that I need to make sure that I'm going to send you out the door in a safe way. And it's sometimes it's a hard choice. I just can't prescribe something just because it'll make you feel better.
Yeah, you've just hit on something. And Matt, I'd love for you to help us kind of dig into this even a little bit deeper, because I think the Nevada example is a really good one. Because what do you think they decided? The state government of Nevada decided that it was important to certify this. Like, what was their calculation? And are there other examples that you're seeing, not to put you on the spot, but just to help us think, like, this clearly was a risk-benefit analysis that they made. And they decided that there was more of a benefit than a risk to certifying this. So help us understand that, and if there are any other examples out there.
Yeah, and I'll only speculate as to what was going through the minds of the Nevada State Legislature, but I think the alternative to sort of locking those people out of the conversation is that they're going to go have their own conversation. And so there is a risk that if you give the patient the snail mucin, that patient is going to have an allergic reaction. But there's also a risk that if you don't administer that snail mucin, that patient is not going to seek out medical care at all for this or for future things until they're absolutely forced to, kicking and screaming. And so
I can't believe we're talking about snail mucin, but go ahead.
I'm so
it feels very vulnerable. You said that.
Go ahead.
Brenda, how does my skin look? Because
Beautiful.
it's snail mucin.
No comment. No comment. No comment.
So no, I think that there's this idea that like you can bring people into the fold. It's actually the sort of like the whole rationale behind the existence of complementary medicine, right? But what I think the key is that rather than debunk, and making yourself go crazy with trying to stomp down the latest fad, which is, it's mostly ineffectual. I think what you need to do to have a clear conscience, Mark, is you need to have a protocol in place for sort of like the most common alternatives that folks are likely to come to you with, right? So there's like that 80-20 rule, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, acupuncture, right. 80% of the questions you ask are 80% of the people are going to ask the same 20% of the questions. Another good example of that, Brenda, is and this is again going back a little bit to the paranormal, but not really because it's also medical. In the Muslim world, there are a lot of people who believe they've been possessed by jinn, and jinn like genie, and this is a very common belief. It's held by academics. It's held by folks who have fine educations. They use jinn possession to explain a wide range of symptoms that we would call diagnosable psychoses. When those people go into a medical clinic in the Muslim world, the doctor does not laugh them out of the building. The doctor has a protocol in place. The psychologist will say, yes, let us get our specialist for treating jinn possession. And that will be I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it correctly, but like a rakia, a holy man who will come in and he'll have a series of actions that he will take, including taking some powerful words out of the Quran and writing them down on some paper and dissolving that paper in water to be drunk by the patient. And there's like a whole conversation with the jinn that takes place. And then that treatment is shown to be as effective for many symptoms and many what we would call mental health disorders as sort of like the more standard drug protocol that we would get in the United States. And that's in part because within those rituals, within that sort of supernatural explanation, there are certain medically recognized supports sort of like Trojan horsed in. So that patient now has a connection to a medical practitioner. That patient will be doing sort of like regular check-ins.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to have a social and peer support group that's going to be talking to them in a language that they understand about what's going on with them. They take it from there. It doesn't work with everything. Some psychoses are the result of severe deterioration of brain tissue, right? Drinking holy water is not going to change that. But for some things, it's effective.
It's really,
and that's a very practical approach.
Yeah. I'm like processing this because I see such incredible pros and such scary cons to this approach. But the one thing I'm left with, our show is about building trust, that, are we in we will try anything to build trust moment as a society. And if that means occasionally prescribing things that we know maybe medically don't have value, but they also don't have harm. I mean, I don't know. It's just, it's like firing up my, like,
I mean, we're not going to be that loose with it. I'm sorry. We just can't be that loose with it. Like, I can't just in this moment of like collapsing trust, be like, I'm going to just throw you a bone out there. That's giving up the entirety of, the premise of being a doctor and the premise of science. And I can do it a little bit if it's building a therapeutic patient-physician relationship. We can work through that. If there is some trust in that relationship, I'm going to trust you to also make sure that you have expressed understanding of the limitations of what I'm about to give you. And if I have enough trust in you that you're going to come back and we're going to work through this, through the end. Final word on snail mucin, and we can never say that on this podcast again. It is, I looked it up. It is rich in hyaluronic acid, which is a natural substance in our body. And hyaluronic acid is an intense moisturizer. It holds like 1,000 times of its weight in water. It's basically fancy moisturizer. So, Brenda, go for it. Out. No more on snail mucin.
Mark signed off on it.
I knew it.
Matt, this is a question now about kind of where all this is taking us. Did you see Terry Moran's interview with President Trump in the Oval Office?
Yes, yeah, I
Okay.
did.
All right. Yeah. So you probably saw this clip that we were watching here together, all about the Kilmar Abrego Garcia tattoos. And there you've got Terry Moran, who's from ABC News, veteran correspondent. You know, he just reads establishment, institution, defender. You know, you got President Trump, who normally the president of the United States sitting in the Oval Office would also read establishment, institution, defender. But of course, in this case, he is a disruptor of institutions. And the conversation moves to this photograph about the tattoos on Garcia's knuckles. And they simply couldn't get past this. And I thought we could play it for you and then just get your thoughts on how this sort of ties in on where we are right now.
Yeah, that's great. It'll be like a minute and a half clip.
And you'll pick out one man, but even the man that you picked out, he said he wasn't a member of a gang. And then they looked, and on his knuckles, he had MS-13.
There's a dispute.
Well, wait a minute. He had MS-13 on his knuckles tattooed.
Oh, he had some tattoos that are interpreted that way. But let's move on.
Wait a minute. Hey, Terry.
He did not have the letter MS-13.
It says MS-13.
That was Photoshop. That
was Photoshop. Terry, you can't do that. Hey, they're giving you the big break of a lifetime. You know, you're doing the interview. I picked you because, frankly, I never heard of you, but that's okay. I picked you, Terry, but you're not being very nice. He had MS-13 tattooed.
We'll agree to disagree. I want to move on to something else.
Terry, do you want me to show you the picture?
I saw the picture. We'll
and you think it was
disagree.
Photoshop? Well,
here we go.
Don't Photoshop it. Go look at his hand. He had MS-13.
He did have tattoos that can be interpreted that way. I'm not an expert on them. I want to turn to Ukraine, sir.
Terry,
I want to get to Ukraine.
No. He had MS as clear as you can be, not interpreted. This is why people no longer believe the news, because
when
it's
he was
fake
photographed
news.
in El Salvador, they aren't there. But let's just go on. They aren't there when he's in El Salvador.
They weren't there, but they're there now, right?
No,
but
they're in your picture.
Terry.
Ukraine, sir.
He's got MS-13 on his knuckles.
All right.
Okay?
Well, we'll take a look at that.
You do such a disservice.
We'll take a look at that,
Why don't you just say, yes, he does, and, go on to something else?
It's contested. Ukraine.
So, Matt, in your book, you have a sociologist who says about the breakdown of trust in our institutions. He says, it creates this whole world where anything goes, anything is possible. My knowledge is just as valuable as your knowledge because we don't have any shared understanding of facts. Like, what did you hear in that exchange?
I mean, this is absolutely at the crux of it. This is a reflection of a movement that values personal experience, or as Russ from the New York Times calls it, individualism, over sort of a shared collective agreement on a set of facts, right? It's just night and day.
And we should say for our listeners, like, again, from my perspective, I don't know how we're supposed to say this anymore, but like, it's so clearly photoshopped. It's not even a question.
I know that is, look, the idea of a shared set of facts, I think it feels like that was the before times. And, now what I'm hearing you say, even in your analysis of that clip, is like, it's sort of how we approach each other is really where any reconciliation or common ground lies. Because I don't even know, you guys, if we can agree on the same things. I like hate to bring it to that. And I don't even know if we can make that a goal anymore. And I don't even mean to say that needs to necessarily be a bad thing. Like, we have to make sure that society continues to function on some level. And of course, there's a lot of hurdles to that from a lot of people's perspectives right now. But I'm almost wondering, and, just bringing it back full circle to your books, particularly with Ghost Hunters or Ghost Lab, it's this idea that, like, to this group, belief in paranormal meant something really big. It united them. It gave them purpose in a region that was being just undergoing a lot of problems, from local community colleges closing and hospitals. And I think at one point you had said something about opioids. If government, or just if there's no systemic intervention, like, what do we expect? Of course, people are going to go to something that they believe. And so if we're not going to actually provide real relief to people, like, can we really blame them for going to things that provide them comfort? And I don't know. I just kind of put that out there. Matt, I don't know what you think about that as kind of your final word.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Brenda. That really sums it up. We're at this super important moment in history. I think there is a path forward for institutions and institution-minded folks, but institutions don't seem to be on that path at all. And so I think, when I'm out there talking to my conservative friends or maybe talking to a conservative about politics for the first time, I try to remember that we have a lot of shared values and that these people are gettable. They can be brought back into the fold with respectful discussion. Often my first thing that I say to a conservative is, hey, look, we're both afraid of these elites who are running the world and sort of like stomping on the little guy. The only difference is that I worry that those are sort of like the corporate bigwigs and the capitalistic business interests, and you think that it's the government that's in the service of those interests, and that can get the conversation going. I think we definitely need to rebuild trust, and we can maybe just start with our neighbors.
Well, listen, I love that. And I will just, again, show everybody, or actually, you can't see this, but anyway, it's called The Ghost Lab by Matt Hongoltz-Hetling. It comes out May 20th, right, Matt?
That's right.
Great.
Hey, how do you have a copy? I don't have a copy yet.
I got a copy of your book. I can tell you where to get one.
Brenda, can I ask Matt one?
Oh, sure. Yeah, Maggie, go for it.
So I'm so fascinated with all of these different paths forward. And I wonder, Matt, if you can illuminate what maybe one concrete thing that people in science, medicine, public health could do to help bring trust back, to build that trust.
Yeah, I think absolutely. Yeah, I talked about homeopaths. Let me go a step further, and I would say license psychic mediums. It sounds so ridiculous. It sounds like it's just so beyond the pale. But I think that they can serve a lot of the same function of driving folks back into the fold of medicine and science if there are some parameters that allow them to do their business and that bring people with medical issues and maybe some psychological issues back in touch with the medical professionals and the help that they need.
License who exactly?
Mediums, psychic mediums.
Like they connect with the other world and like conversations with the dead.
Right.
People treat them like, yeah.
You need, I need to send you need to send me to a medium so that I could then believe in science again?
Yes. If the medium has a stake in science, Mark, they will bridge that gap. You don't have to engage in the cognitive dissonance. And I get it. I came to this position very reluctantly. It feels like capitulation to dark forces, doesn't it? It feels like it's sort of giving up. I have come to believe that this is the strategy for success, that you're not legitimizing those beliefs. You are maintaining your own legitimacy. And that's a sad way to put it, but I think that's where we are.
Mark, did you want to add anything?
No, I mean, I think we're open to all of these, systems that can support a common end goal. And I don't think any doctor would shy away from, having people believe in a support system that's based in faith, or even if it is a medium, and if that's helpful, great, but not to the detriment and don't villainize what the doctor is saying at the same time. It can be both. It can be both. Yeah. And it needs to be both.
This is fascinating. Matt, please come back.
We have talking. So much.
There's so much. Well, listen, Matt. Yeah.
I actually have a very quick question for Mark. Mark, can you tell me anything about Bigfoot mucus? Because I've heard some pretty amazing things about it.
That's another episode. That's just too much. I don't even know. I don't know.
Naturally occurring retinol, right?
I don't know. I mean, look, retinol is vitamin A. Like, right, there are common things that we could rally around. Retinol is a form of vitamin A. Maybe that'll be the bridge.
I tell you. Okay, well, here's to retinol, everyone. Thank you so much, Matt Hongoltz-Hetling. If you liked this podcast, please rate it, like it, review it on where you listen to your podcasts. Please send us questions or comments at questions@whyshoulditrustyou.net. I am Brenda Adhikari. He is Tom Johnson. She is Maggie Bartlett. And he is Dr. Mark Abdul-Malik. Thank you to Matt Hongoltz-Hetling. And we'll see you right back here next week.